Welcome back, YouTube. Sensei Domino here. Today I've got another set to share with you, the 1985 Topps Baseball set. But first, I'd like to give a shout out to Eric over at the Card Closet, who helped me get quite a ways into completing this set, so thank you so much, Eric. But as usual, I'll go ahead and show the fronts and the backs of the first few cards, then I'll just show the fronts so the video isn't too long. We'll start with Hall of Famer Carlton Fisk. Steve Garvey. Fantastic TTM signer. I think he's still $5 per. Dwight Gooden in his rookie year. Cliff Johnson. Hall of Famer Joe Morgan. Pete Rose. Hall of Famer Nolan Ryan. Juan Samuel. Hall of Famer Bruce Sutter. Hall of Famer Don Sutton. Ralph Houck. I'll show you the backs of a couple of these. Davey Lopes. Tim Lawler. Chris Bando. Jerry Koosman, another great TTM signer. Bobby Meacham. Mike Scott. Mickey Hatcher. George Frazier. Chet Lemon. Lee Tunnell. Dwayne Kuiper. Red Saberhagen rookie. Let me show the back of this. Jesse Barfield. Steve Bedrosian. Roy Smalley. Bruce Berenyi. Dan Billardello. Odell Jones. Hall of Famer Cal Ripken. Terry Whitfield. Chuck Porter. Tito Landrum. Ed Nunez. Greg Nettles. Fred Brining. Reed Nichols. Jackie Moore. Johnny Walkenfuss. Hall of Famer Phil Niekro. Mike Fischlin. Luis Sanchez, Andre David, Dickie Thon, Greg Minton, Gary Woods, Dave Rosema, Tony Fernandez, Butch Davis, John Candelaria, Bob Watson, Jerry Dibzinski, Tom Gorman, Cesar Cedeno, Frank Tanana, another great TTMer, Jim Dwyer, Pat Zachary, Orlando Mercado, Rick Waits, George Hendrick, Kurt Kaufman, Mike Ramsey, Steve McCaddy, Mark Bailey, Bill Buckner, Hall of Famer Dick Williams, Rafael Santana, Von Hayes, Jim Wynn, Don Baylor, Tim Loudner, Rick Sutcliffe, Rusty Kuntz, Mike Krukow, Willie Upshaw, Alan Bannister, Joe Beckwith, Scott Fletcher, Rick Mailer, Keith Hernandez, Len Sakata, Joe Price, Charlie Moore, Spike Owen, Mike Marshall, Don Ossie, David Green, Brent Smith, another great TTMer. This is probably a cool card to get signed since he's signing for somebody. Jackie Gutierrez, Hall of Famer Goose Gossage, another great TTM signer. I think he signs one for free, if I remember right. Jeff Burrows, Paul Owens, Don Schultze, Toby Hara, another great TTMer. Jose Cruz is another great signer. I believe he's 2 per. Another great signer. Johnny Ray, Pete Filson, Steve Lake, Milt Wilcox, Hall of Famer George Brett. Go ahead and clear these off real quick. Jim Acker, Tommy Dunbar, Randy Lurch, Mike Fitzgerald, Ron Kittle, Pascual Perez, Tom Foley, Darnell Coles, Gary Renicky, Alejandro Pena, Doug DeSenses, Tom Tellman, Tommy Herr, Bob James, Hall of Famer Ricky Henderson, rest in peace, Oil Can Boyd, I believe he's a TTMer, Greg Gross, Eric Shao, Pat Corrales, Steve Kemp, Checklist, Tom Bernansky, Dave Smith, Rich Hebner, Kent Tekulve, Rupert Jones, Mark Gubiza, I believe this is his rookie. Yep. Ernie Witt, another great TTMer, Gene Garber, Al Oliver, this is a cool subset, father-son, Gus Bell and Buddy Bell, Hall of Famer Yogi Berra and Dale Berra, Ray Boone and Bob Boone. Bob Boone's a great TTMer. Tito and Terry Francona, Bob and Terry Kennedy, Bill and Jeff Kunkel. This is a cool one to get signed because both of them are TTMers, Vern Law and Vance Law. Dick Schofield and Dick Schofield. Bob Skinner and Joel Skinner. Roy Smalley and Roy Smalley. Dave and Mike Stenhouse. Dizzy and Steve Trout. Ozzie Virgil and Ozzie Virgil. And that's the last of the father-sons. Next we have Ron Gardenhire. Alvin Davis rookie. Gary Reedus. Bill Swaggerty. Steve Yeager. Dickie Knowles. Hall of Famer Jim Rice. Moose Haas. Steve Braun. Frank LaCourte. Argenis Salazar. Hall of Famer Yogi Berra. Greg Reynolds. Tug McGraw. Pat Tabler. Carlos Diaz. Lance Parrish, Ken Schramm, Benny DiStefano, Hall of Famer Dennis Eckersley, another great TTMer. I do believe he's 10 per. Jorge Orta, Dusty Baker, I believe he's a TTMer right now. Keith Atherton, Rufino Linares, Garth Orge, both he and his brother are great TTMers. Dan Spillner, George Foster, Bill Stein, Jack Perconti, Mike Young, Rick Honeycutt, Hall of Famer Dave Parker, rest in peace, Bill Schroeder, Dave Von Olin, Miguel Delone, Tommy John, Hall of Famer Dave Winfield, one of the big rookies of the set, 7-time Cy Young Award winner Roger Clemens, Tim Flannery, Larry McWilliams, Carmen Castillo, Al Holland, Bob Lillis, Mike Walters, Greg Pryor, Warren Brewstar, Rusty Staub, Steve Nicosia, Howard Johnson, Jimmy Keat rookie, Dave Stegman, Glenn Hubbard, Pete O'Brien, Mike Warren, Eddie Milner, Denny Martinez, Hall of Famer Reggie Jackson. Go ahead and clear these off. Next we have Bert Hooton, Gorman Thomas, Bob McClure, Art Howe, Steve Rogers, great TTMer Phil Garner, Mark Clear, Champ Summers, Bill Campbell, Gary Matthews, Clay Christensen, George Vukovic, Billy Gardner, John Tudor, Bob Brenly, Jerry Don Gleaton, Leon Roberts, Doyle Alexander, Gerald Perry, Fred Lynn, I believe he's a TTMer, but I think he only signs index cards. Ron Reed, Hubie Brooks, Tom Hume, Al Cowens, Mike Boddicker, Juan Beniquez, Danny Darwin, Dion James, Dave LaPointe, Hall of Famer Gary Carter, Dwayne Murphy, Dave Beard, Ed Jurak, Jerry Narron, Gary Maddox, Mark Thurmond, Julio Franco, Jose Rio rookie, Tim Tuffle, really nice pitcher, Dave Stieb, Jim Fry, Greg Harris, Barbaro Garvey, Mike Jones, Chili Davis, Mike Norris, Wayne Tollison, Terry Forster, Hall of Famer Harold Baines, Jesse Orozco, Brad Golden, Dan Ford, Sid Bream rookie. I believe Sid Bream does TTMs. Pete Vukovich, Lonnie Smith, Mike Stanton, Brian Little, Mike Brown, Gary Allenson, Dave Righetti, checklist, Greg Booker, Mel Hall, Joe Sambito, Juan Samuel, the great TTMer, Frank Viola, Henry Cotto, Chuck Tanner, Doug Baker, Dan Quisenberry. Another cool subset. Number one draft picks. 1968 number one. Tim Foley. 69 Jeff Burroughs. 74 Bill Allman. 76 Floyd Bannister. 77 Hall of Famer Harold Baines. 78 Bob Horner. 79 Al Chambers. 1980 Darryl Strawberry. 81 Mike Moore. 1982 Sean Dunston rookie. 83 Tim Belcher. 1984 Sean Abner. Next we have Fran Mullins. Marty Bystrom. Andreessen, Rudy Law, Walt Terrell, Jeff Kunkel, Tom Underwood, Cecil Cooper, I believe he signs, Bob Welsh, Brad Kamensk, Kurt Young, Tom Nito, Joe Niekro, Ricky Nelson, Gary Lucas, Marty Barrett, Andy Hawkins, Hall of Famer Rod Carew. Go ahead and clear these off. Next we have John Montefusco, Tim Corcoran, Mike Jeffcoat, Gary Gaetti, Dale Barra, Rick Rushell, Sparky Anderson, Hall of Famer, John Wathen, Mike Witt, another great signer, Manny Trio, Jim Gott, Mark Hill, Dave Schmidt, Ron Oster, Doug Sisk, John Lowenstein, Jack Lazorko, Hall of Famer Ted Simmons, Jeff Jones, Dale Murphy, Ricky Horton, Dave Stapleton, Andy McGaffigan, Bruce Bochy, John Denny, Kevin Bass, Brooke Jacoby, Bob Shirley, Ron Washington, Leon Durham, Bill Lasky, Brian Harper, Willie Hernandez, Dick Hauser, Bruce Benedict, Rance Mullenix, another great signer, Billy Sample, Britt Burns, Danny Heap, Hall of Famer Robin Yount, Floyd Rayford, Ted Power, Bill Russell, Dave Henderson, Charlie Lee, Terry Pendleton rookie, Rick Langford, Bob Boone, Domingo Ramos, Hall of Famer Wade Boggs, another great TTM signer. I believe he's $10 per, except his rookies are $20 per. Juan Augusto, Famer Joe Morgan, Julio Solano, Andre Robertson, Bert Blyleven. I know he signs. I'm not sure how much he charges. Maybe 10, 15, something like that. Dave Meyer, Rich Bordy, Tony Pena, Pat Sheridan, Hall of Famer Steve Carlson, Alfredo Griffin, Craig McMurtry, Ron Hodges, Richard Dotson, Danny Ozark, Todd Cruz, Keith Cato, Dave Bergman, R.J. Reynolds, Hall of Famer Bruce Sutter, Mickey Rivers, Roy Howell, Mike Moore, Brian Downing, Jeff Reardon, Jeff Newman, Checklist, Alan Wiggins, Charlie Hudson, Ken Griffey, Roy Smith, Denny Walling, Rick Lysander, Jody Davis, Jose De Leon, Danny Gladden, Buddy Biancalana, Bert Roberge, another great subset is the 1984 Olympic baseball team. We have Rod Dedeaux, the head coach, Sid Akins, Flavio Alfaro, Don August, Scott Bankhead, Bob Caffrey, Mike Dunn, Gary Green, John Hoover, Shane Mack, John Marzano, Oda B. McDowell. Go ahead and clear these off. Another big card in the set, Mark McGwire, rookie. Pat Pasillo, Corey Snyder, great TTMer, and Billy Swift. Now, one person they did leave out of that set is Will Clark, who was actually part of that team. And for whatever reason, they didn't put him in this 85 set. Would have been cool if they did. Next we have Tom Verizer, Len Whitehouse, Bobby Ramos, Sid Monge, Brad Willman, Bob Horner, Bobby Cox, Hall of Famer, Bud Black, Vance Law, Gary Ward, Ron Darling, Wayne Gross, John Franco, rookie, Ken Landreau, another great TTMer, Mike Caldwell, another great TTMer, Hall of Famer Andre Dawson, who I believe is 10 per, Dave Rucker, Carney Lansford, Barry Bunnell, Al Nipper, Mike Hargrove, Vern Rule, Mario Ramirez, Larry Anderson, Rick Cerrone, Ron Davis, UL Washington, Thad Bosley, Jim Morrison, Gene Richards, Dan Petrie, Willie Aikens, Al Jones, Hall of Famer Joe Torre, Junior Ortiz, Fernando Valenzuela, rest in peace, Dwayne Walker, Ken Forsch, George Wright, Tony Phillips, Tippy Martinez, Jim Sundberg, Jeff Lady, Darryl Thomas, Phil Bradley, Steve Garvey, Bruce Hurst, John Castino, Tom Waddell, Glenn Wilson, Bob Nepper, Tim Foley, Cecilio Guante, Randy Johnson, Charlie Lee Brandt, Ryan Sandberg, Hall of Famer, rest in peace, Marty Castillo, Gary Lavelle, Dave Collins, Mike Mason, Bobby Gritch, Hall of Famer Tony La Russa, also a pretty good TTMer, Ed Lynch, Wayne Krenshiki, Sammy Stewart, Steve Sachs, Pete Ladd, Jim Essien, Tim Wallach, Kurt Kepshire, Andre Thornton, Jeff Stone, Bob Ojeda, Kurt Bavakwa, Mike Madden, Lou Whitaker, Dale Murray, Harry Spillman, Mike Smithson, Larry Boa, another great signer, Matt Young, Steve Balboni, Frank Williams, Joel Skinner, Brian Clark, Jason Thompson, Rick Camp, Davey Johnson, Oral Hershiser rookie, Rich Dower, Mario Soto, Donnie Scott, Gary Pettis, Ed Romero, Danny Cox, and Hall of Famer Mike Schmidt. Go ahead and clear these off real quick. Dan Schatzeder, Rick Miller, Tim Conroy, Jerry Willard, Jim Beattie, Franklin Stubbs rookie, Ray Fontenot, John Shelby, Milt May, Kent Herbeck, Hall of Famer Lee Smith, Tom Brookins, Lynn Jones, Jeff Cornell, Dave Concepcion, Roy Lee Jackson, Jerry Martin, Chris Chambliss, Doug Rader, Lamar Hoyt, Rick Dempsey, Hall of Famer Paul Molitor, another great TTM signer. I think he's 20 per. Candy Maldonado, Rob Wilfong, Daryl Porter, Dave Palmer, checklist, Bill Kruger, Rich Gedman, Dave Dravecki, Joe Lefevre, Frank DePino, who I think is a good signer, Tony Bernizard, Brian Dayette, Pat Putnam, and the other big rookie, This one's slightly off center. Kirby Puckett. Don Robinson. Keith Moreland. Aurelio Lopez. Claudel Washington. Mark Davis. Don Slott. Mike Squires. Bruce Keeson. Lloyd Mosby. Brett Gaff. Pete Rose. Larry Parrish. Mike Scioscia. Scott McGregor. Andy Van Slyke. Chris Codaroli. Bob Clark. Doug Flynn. Bob Stanley. Sixto Lescano. Len Barker. Carmelo Martinez. Jay Howell. Bill Madlock. Daryl Motley. Houston Jimenez. Dick Ruthven. Alan Ashby. Kirk Gibson. Ed Vandenberg. Joel Youngblood. Cliff Johnson. Ken Obergfell. Daryl Strawberry, second year. Another great signer, Charlie Huff. Tom Paciorek. Jay Tibbs. Joe Altobelli. Pedro Guerrero. Jamie Kokenauer. Chris Spire. Terry Francona. Ron Romanek. Dwight Evans. Mark Wagner. Ken Phelps. Bobby Brown. Kevin Gross. Butch Weiniger. Bill Scherer. Doug Frobel. Bobby Castillo. Bob Dernier. Ray Knight. Larry Herndon. Jeff Robinson. Rick Leach. Curtis Wilkerson. Larry Gura. Jerry Hairston. Brad Leslie. Jose Oquendo. Storm Davis, and Pete Rose. Go ahead and clear these off. Sorry for bumping the camera. Hall of Famer Tommy Lasorda, Jeff Dedman, another great signer, Rick Manning, Darryl Sconiers, Hall of Famer Ozzie Smith, Rich Gale, Bill Allman, Craig Lefferts, Roderick Perkins, Hall of Famer Jack Morris, Ozzie Virgil, Mike Armstrong, Terry Poole, Al Williams, Marvell Wynn, Scott Sanderson, Willie Wilson, Pete Falcone, Jeff Leonard, Dwight Gooden rookie, little off center, Marvis Foley, Luis Leal, Greg Walker, Benny Ayala, Mark Langston rookie, Herman Rivera, Eric Davis rookie, Renee Latchman, Dick Schofield, Hall of Famer Tim Raines, Bob Forsch, another great TTMer, Bruce Boakty, Glenn Hoffman, Bill Dolly, Terry Kennedy, Shane Raleigh, Brett Butler, Mike Pagliarulo, Ed Hodge, Steve Henderson, Rod Scurry, Dave Owen, Johnny Grubb, Mark Huisman, Damaso Garcia, Scott Thompson, Rafael Ramirez, Bob Jones, Sid Fernandez, Greg Lazinski, Jeff Russell, might be his rookie card, maybe I'm wrong, Joe Nolan, Mark Bruhard, Henderson, Joaquin Andujar, Chuck Cotier, Jim Slayton, Mike Stenhouse, Checklist, Hall of Famer Tony Gwynn, Steve Crawford, Mike Heath, Luis Aguayo, Steve Farr, second year Don Mattingly, Mike Lacoste, Dave Engel, Steve Trout, Lee Lacy, Hall of Famer Tom Seaver, Dane Orge, great signer, Juan Berenguer, Buck Martinez, Atlee Hammaker, Hall of Famer Tony Perez, Albert Hall, Wally Backman, Joey McLaughlin, Bob Kearney, Jerry Royce, Ben Ogilvie, Doug Corbett, Hall of Famer Whitey Herzog, Bill Doran, Bill Caudill, Mike Easler, Bill Gullickson, Len Matusek, Luis De Leon, Hall of Famer Alan Trammell, Dennis Rasmussen, Randy Bush, Tim Stoddard, Joe Carter, Rick Roden, John Rabb, Onyx Concepcion, George Bell, Donnie Moore, and Hall of Famer Eddie Murray. Go ahead and clear these off. Next, we have the All-Star subset, Hall of Famer Eddie Murray, Damaso Garcia. Go ahead and show you the backs of these. Hall of Famer George Brett, Hall of Famer Cal Ripken, Hall of Famer Dave Winfield, Hall of Famer Ricky Henderson, Tony Armas, Lance Parrish, Mike Boddicker, Frank Viola, Quisenberry, Keith Hernandez, Ryan Sandberg, Hall of Famer, Hall of Famer Mike Schmidt, Hall of Famer Ozzie Smith, Dale Murphy, Hall of Famer Tony Gwynn, Jeff Leonard, Hall of Famer Gary Carter, Rick Sutcliffe, Bob Knepper, Hall of Famer Bruce Sutter. Next we have Dave Stewart, Oscar Gamble, Floyd Bannister, Al Bumbry, Frank Pastore, Bob Baylor, Hall of Famer Don Sutton, Dave Kingman, Neil Allen, John McNamara, Tony Scott, John Henry Johnson, Gary Templeton, Jerry Mumphrey, Bo Diaz, Omar Moreno, Ernie Camacho, Jack Clark, John Butcher, Ron Hasse, Frank White, Doug Bayer, Buddy Bell, Jim Clancy, Alex Trevino, Lee Mazzilli, Julio Cruz, Hall of Famer Raleigh Fingers, Kelvin Chapman, Bob Ochinko, Greg Brock, Larry Milbourne, Ken Singleton, Rob Piciolo, probably butchered that, Willie McGee, Ray Burris, Jim Fanning, Hall of Famer Nolan Ryan, who does do TTMs, but I think he's 75 per. Jerry Remy, Eddie Whitson, Kiko Garcia, Jamie Easterly, Willie Randolph, Paul Mirabella, Darrell Brown, Ron Say, Joe Cowley, Carlton Fisk, Hall of Famer, Jeff Zahn, Johnny LeMaster, Hal McRae. Dennis Lamp, another great signer. Mookie Wilson. Jerry Royster. Ned Yost. Just a few cards to go. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Mike Davis. Nick Osaski. Mike Flanagan. Jim Gantner. Tom Niedenfuer. Mike Jorgensen. Checklist. Tony Armas. Enos Cabell. Jim Wolford. Steve Comer. Luis Salazar. Another great signer. Ron Guidry. Ivan DeJesus. And the last card in the set, Darrell Evans. So that's all I have for you tonight. Till next time, thanks for watching the video, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.